This is Tegan. She's my girlfriend. The less you have on, the better.
No comment there. We're either gonna get along really well.
Secrets, silence, and a heartbreak that no one saw coming. Sometimes the most painful stories aren't the ones we watch unfold on reality TV, but the ones whispered in the shadows, stories that never made it into the polished edits of Welcome to Plathville. And this one, it changes everything we thought we knew about Micah Plath. Hi friends, my name is Sarah, and welcome to Sister Wives Daily. If you love deep dives into the hidden truths and untold stories behind reality TV families, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our conversations here, and tell me in the comments what you think about this story, because trust me, you're going to have a lot of thoughts. Now, let's talk about Veronica. She wasn't a cast member, she didn't get confessionals, and she certainly wasn't a name the producers ever wanted you to know. But she was there. She was someone who knew Micah personally, who loved him, who stood by him, and who carried a pain that the cameras never captured. While the world was being sold an image of Micah as the golden boy, the handsome, smiling, rebellious son stepping into modeling and freedom, Veronica was quietly living through something that painted a very different picture, because if Welcome to Plathville showed us Micah as the confident bachelor making his way in the world, Veronica's truth revealed a side of him that was far from golden.
He met my sister.
It was messy, it was heartbreaking, and it left her with scars that silence only made worse, and that's why her story matters. Because reality TV so often edits around the uncomfortable truths, but in doing so, it erases the voices of those left behind. Veronica's connection to Micah is one of those voices. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it, but behind the smiles and modeling photos, there was a very different story, when Welcome to Plathville first hit our screens. There was one sibling who seemed to embody freedom, charm, and possibility in a way that captured viewers instantly, Micah Plath. He was tall, handsome, and full of quiet confidence, the very picture of a young man breaking away from the sheltered, ultra-conservative home he was raised in. To fans, Micah became the symbol of what it looked like to finally step into the real world after years of isolation under Kim and Barry's rigid rules. On camera, Micah was framed as the golden boy. His storyline was clean and appealing, a son leaving behind the small-town bubble to chase modeling dreams. We saw glossy photo shoots, big smiles, and the thrill of him moving into his own apartment. He was polite, soft-spoken, and approachable, qualities that made him look not just like a rebel, but like the most balanced, well-adjusted of the Plath children. He wasn't clashing dramatically with his parents like Mariah, and he wasn't caught in a complicated marriage like Ethan. Micah looked like he had it all figured out, but as anyone who's followed this family knows, appearances can be deceiving. Because while viewers were celebrating Micah's independence, there was an entirely different story unfolding off-camera. His personal relationships told a far messier truth, one that didn't fit into the glossy storyline TLC wanted to tell. To understand why that matters, we have to look at the bigger family dynamic. For decades, Kim and Barry controlled every detail of their children's lives. No TV, no mainstream music, no outside influences, just their small, sheltered world. When the kids grew older, cracks in that system started to show. Mariah fought openly with her parents, pushing for freedom and self-expression, even when it meant estrangement. Ethan, the eldest, tried to carve out his own marriage with Olivia, but years of rigid control left scars that constantly threatened to tear them apart. And in the middle of it all was Micah, the brother who seemed to rise above the chaos with charm and good looks. The show made Micah look like the safe success story, where Mariah was, too
emotional, and Ethan was too angry. Micah was positioned as level-headed, focused, and ready to embrace the outside world with ease. And fans ate it up. They admired his discipline, his modeling career, and the way he spoke about enjoying his independence without throwing his family completely under the bus. But what we didn't see, and what makes this story so shocking, is that Micah's golden image was hiding cracks just as deep as the rest of his siblings. His relationships behind the cameras were complicated, messy, and in some cases, deeply hurtful to the people closest to him. That's where Veronica's story comes into focus. Think about it. Micah wasn't just a public figure living under the lens of reality TV. He was also a young man navigating his first real relationships outside the sheltered Plath bubble. That kind of pressure, the pressure to perform a perfect version of yourself on television while still figuring out who you really are, creates a dangerous divide. On one side, you have the polished golden boy the audience sees. On the other, you have the private Micah, the one who makes mistakes, who struggles with loyalty, and who, in Veronica's case, betrayed someone who trusted him. This contrast, the image versus the reality, is what makes Veronica's experience so important to hear. Because while the world cheered Micah's journey as a symbol of freedom, the people who knew him off camera were living through a much darker story. And it's this gap between perception and truth that will ultimately change how we see the so-called golden boy. If Micah's image was built to shine, Veronica's story was left in the shadows. For a long time, she was just a name whispered quietly among fans, never mentioned on screen and never acknowledged by producers. But eventually, parts of her truth surfaced, not in glossy episodes, but in the raw, unfiltered space of social media. Through a QA and verified mentions that reached fans who were paying attention, Veronica opened up about her connection to Micah and the painful betrayal that changed her life. She spoke not with the polish of a TV edit, but with the vulnerable honesty of someone carrying scars. Veronica described being close to Micah, investing in him, supporting him, and believing she had a place in his life. But behind the charming smile and the golden boy persona, she says he betrayed her trust. The betrayal wasn't just a fling, a careless mistake. It cut deep, because at the heart of it was something far more devastating. Veronica revealed that she suffered a miscarriage, one that left her not only physically shattered, but emotionally undone. When I heard this, I honestly had to stop and think about how much pain she must have carried. Miscarriage is already one of the most isolating experiences a woman can go through. To endure it while also feeling silenced, overlooked, or erased from the narrative makes it even heavier. Veronica didn't get the comfort of having her story shared with empathy. She didn't get space on the show to process her grief. Instead, she was left out entirely, while the cameras turned their focus to Micah's modeling shoots, his newfound independence, and his carefully crafted journey of growth. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Fans saw Micah being celebrated for breaking free, smiling, posing, and becoming a role model for independence. Meanwhile, Veronica was living through heartbreak and betrayal with no platform, no validation, and no acknowledgement. Her story, her pain, didn't fit the brand TLC wanted to sell, and that silence is almost as painful as the betrayal itself. When Veronica chose to speak, she didn't come across as bitter or vindictive. She came across as someone who had been silenced for too long. Her words were honest, raw, and deeply human. She wasn't trying to destroy Micah's image. She was simply trying to reclaim her own voice. And that's what makes her story matter. Because in reality, television, when Veronica's words came forward, what was perhaps most striking wasn't only Micah's silence. It was the silence of the Plath family as a whole. A family that has built its entire public persona on morality, on judgment, on weighing in about what's right and wrong in relationships, suddenly had nothing to say. Think back to Welcome to Plathville. This isn't a family that has ever shied away from voicing opinions about love, courtship, or even marriage. Kim and Barry set the tone early on, controlling, watchful, and ever-present. They had strong words for Lydia, reminding her constantly of the rules for courtship, the do's and don'ts of emotional purity, the boundaries that supposedly protected her from heartbreak. They sat in judgment over Ethan and Olivia's marriage, criticizing Olivia for being too independent, or for influencing Ethan in ways they didn't approve of. Even Mariah, when she started breaking away, was subject to endless commentary, criticism, and subtle digs about whether her choices were truly right. And yet, when Veronica spoke about betrayal, heartbreak, and miscarriage, where was that same voice of judgment? Where was that same moral compass that the Plaths were so quick to hold over their own children? Or worse, their children's spouses? Why was her pain not worth speaking up about? The hypocrisy is impossible to ignore. On the show, Micah's journey was framed as admirable. He was the golden boy, the son who stepped out, but always in a way that seemed to uphold the Plath image. The family could quietly distance themselves from his modeling career while still enjoying the glow of his popularity. His rebellion was acceptable because it was glossy, marketable, and made for good TV. But Veronica's truth? That didn't fit the brand. So instead of addressing it, they chose silence.
Feels like
A
just last
silence
month
that feels
he met my
louder than
sister.
words. A silence that tells us exactly what mattered to the Plaths. The image, the storyline, the carefully curated narrative that kept Micah shining while Veronica's suffering was erased. And it's not as if the Plaths were unaware of the importance of public opinion. They've lived by it. Barry and Kim repeatedly emphasized how appearances mattered, how choices reflected on the family. When Ethan and Olivia fought, it became a spectacle. When Mariah explored independence, it became a storyline. Lydia's courtship, purity, was praised and put on display as an example. They used these narratives as teaching tools, as reminders to the audience of what was acceptable. So why, when faced with Veronica's heartbreak, did they not even whisper support? Why didn't they extend the same moral scrutiny to Micah's behavior that they once so freely unleashed on others? Was it easier to judge daughters and outsiders than it was to look inward and hold their son accountable? It's a double standard that feels almost cruel. Veronica's voice wasn't just overlooked, it was actively ignored. Her pain didn't earn a statement, a defense, or even the acknowledgement of existence, and that silence wasn't neutral. It was protective. Protective of Micah, protective of the image, protective of the storyline. And let's be honest, that silence reveals what this family values most. It isn't honesty, it isn't compassion, it isn't even the religious or moral code they've so long preached. It's control. Control over the story. Control over perception. Control over who gets to be seen and who gets erased. When we look at Kim especially, the hypocrisy becomes glaring. She was quick to tear down Olivia, quick to police Mariah, quick to use Lydia as a poster child for purity. She had no hesitation in judging Ethan's choices as a husband, questioning his loyalty and independence. Yet, when her own son's actions left a woman broken in, to grieving she said nothing at all. And Barry, the father who preached about values, who acted as the quiet authority in the background, he didn't step in either. No words of accountability, no recognition that real damage had been done. Silence. Even the siblings, who often chafed under their parents' rules, followed the pattern. Ethan, Mariah, Lydia, all of them remained quiet. And that's telling, because it suggests that within the Plath system, loyalty to image is stronger than loyalty to truth. So again, we have to ask, why was Veronica's suffering not worth speaking up about? Why was her voice not defended, not even acknowledged? Why do women like Olivia and Mariah get judged endlessly for their choices, while Micah is shielded from accountability when his choices cause harm? The hypocrisy cuts to the heart of what Welcome to Plathville really is. It's not a documentary of a family learning and growing, it's a performance. And performances require protecting the stars while silencing the stories that don't serve the plot. That silence around Veronica is not just absence, it's complicity. It tells us who is protected and who is discarded. And in this case, the Plaths made their choice. They chose to preserve Micah's golden boy image, even if it meant erasing Veronica's heartbreak. And the saddest part? That silence echoes louder than any words they could have spoken, because it proves that in the Plath family, morality is flexible, judgment is selective, and compassion, it's conditional. When you go back and rewatch Micah's story arc on Welcome to Plathville, it's striking just how carefully his image was managed. On the show, and even more so on Instagram, Micah projected this carefree, confident persona. He was the golden boy stepping out from under his parents' strict rules. He was single, independent, and chasing his dreams in the modeling world. The message was clear. Micah was living free, natashed, and unapologetically focused on himself. But once Veronica's words surfaced, that whole narrative cracked, because she revealed a truth that didn't line up with the Instagram posts or the TV edits. Behind the cameras, Micah wasn't always the picture of bachelor independence. He was in a relationship, one serious enough to involve deep emotional ties, betrayal, and even the devastating loss of a pregnancy. That's not just casual dating. That's not just figuring things out. That's a double life. And that's what makes this so jarring for viewers. While we were watching Micah laugh with friends, flex at photo shoots, and play up the role of the charming single model, Veronica was living another reality entirely. Her reality was filled with the complexities of loving him, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the silence that followed. And for her, there was no platform to balance the story out. Micah's version was the only one being broadcast. It's like he was living two lives, one for the cameras and one that was hidden, one where he got to be the handsome, carefree bachelor that fans adored, and one where he was entangled in choices that carried very real consequences for someone else. That gap between image and reality hits especially hard when you think about the modeling career he was building. On Instagram, Micah leaned into a lifestyle brand. Photo shoots in LA, shirtless poses, styled hair, gym shots, hanging out with friends who all projected the same kind of young, successful energy. The narrative was carefully curated, a man free of the chains of Plathville's strict upbringing, carving his own glamorous path. But Veronica's story doesn't fit neatly into that brand. A serious relationship, and especially a pregnancy, didn't align with the image of a carefree, unattached model. In that world, being available is part of the allure. The modeling industry sells fantasy. And Micah, whether consciously or not, leaned into that. To admit that he was deeply involved with someone, that he had responsibilities beyond the perfect photos, would have complicated the image that was so carefully marketed. And here's where the clash with his family's values becomes even more glaring. Remember, Micah grew up in a home where modesty was preached constantly, where dating wasn't casual, it was courtship, carefully monitored, rooted in rules and expectations, where Kim and Barry scrutinized every interaction between their kids and the opposite sex. And yet, once Micah stepped out of that environment, he embraced a lifestyle that stood in direct opposition to everything he had been taught. The irony? The family tolerated it. They tolerated his modeling career, his suggestive photos, his public persona that clashed with the religious image they once held so tightly. They let Micah's double life thrive, as long as it looked polished enough for TV. But Veronica, her truth wasn't tolerated at all. It was ignored. This is where the hypocrisy comes full circle. Micah got to build a glamorous narrative that boosted his public profile. The family protected him by remaining silent, even when Veronica's story made it clear there was pain behind the scenes. Meanwhile, other siblings, like Mariah and Ethan, were dragged through the mud for their choices. Olivia was criticized on camera. Mariah was questioned relentlessly. Lydia was paraded as the example of purity. But Micah's hidden life, that was allowed to stay hidden. And maybe that's what stings the most. Veronica wasn't just dealing with heartbreak. She was up against an entire machine of silence and image-making. Micah could keep playing the part of the single, carefree golden boy, while she was left carrying the weight of a story that didn't fit the script. As viewers, it forces us to ask, how much of what we see on reality TV is real? How much of it is image management? When the cameras followed Micah to photo shoots, when they showed him flexing his independence, were we actually seeing him? Or were we seeing a version of him crafted to fit both the show's narrative and the modeling world's expectations? The modeling industry thrives on illusion. It sells perfection, availability, fantasy. And Micah's public persona lined up perfectly with that illusion. But Veronica's reality revealed the cracks. It showed us that while he was posing for the camera, there was another story playing out, one filled with betrayal, loss, and silence. And in that gap between what we saw and what Veronica lived, the truth about Micah's double life
feels like just last month he met my sister.
It wasn't just about having two sides. It was about choosing which side got the spotlight and which side was erased. So when we think about Micah today, we have to ask ourselves, who was he really during those years on Welcome to Plathville? The carefree model, the golden boy, or the man living a hidden life that left someone else carrying heartbreak in silence? Because no matter how many shirtless photos or styled shoots he posts, Veronica's story has now pulled back the curtain. And once you see the double life, you can't unsee it. If there is one part of this story that truly cuts to the heart, it's Veronica's emotional journey. Her words about the miscarriage, the betrayal, and the silence around her pain move this entire conversation out of the realm of gossip and into something much deeper. This isn't just about a reality TV star hiding a relationship. It's about a woman who endured loss, who carried grief largely in silence, and who eventually found the strength to tell her truth. When Veronica spoke about her miscarriage, it stopped me cold. In her posts and QAs, she shared details that were not sensational or attention-seeking. They were raw, vulnerable, and deeply human. She talked about the self-blame, the endless questions she asked herself. Was it something she did? Was she too saint? Rest? Did she miss a sign? These are the cruel thoughts that so many women face when they go through miscarriage. And the heartbreaking part is, it's never their fault. But grief has a way of convincing us otherwise. This is where Veronica's pain felt the most real, the most unfiltered. Because while the show gave us polished edits of Micah looking carefree and independent, Veronica was living through something that doesn't fit into glossy reality TV packaging. Miscarriage is rarely discussed openly, and when it is, it's often brushed aside, minimized, or drowned out by other narratives. Veronica choosing to share it at all was an act of courage. And as I read her words, I couldn't help but think, how many people in her life even knew the full extent of what she was carrying? How many in the Plath family, who were quick to judge other relationships on camera, chose silence when it came to hers? It's staggering to realize how alone she must have felt in those moments. This is where I felt the most connected to her, I found myself saying, because she wasn't just exposing Micah. She was exposing how silence can break someone. That's the part that stays with you. The betrayal is shocking, the hypocrisy frustrating, but the silence is what wounds the deepest. To suffer and feel like your pain doesn't matter, like it's not even worth acknowledging. That is the kind of loneliness that cuts to the bone. And yet, in that silence, Veronica didn't stay voiceless forever. She found a way to reclaim her story. She chose to speak out, not with anger or revenge, but with honesty. That takes strength, to stand up and say, this is what happened to me. This is my truth. I will not let it be erased. That's not weakness. That's resilience. It reminds me of the way reality TV often glosses over women's pain, especially when it doesn't serve the storyline. How many times have we seen raw emotion edited down to a soundbite? How many times have real struggles been turned into plot devices, stripped of their human weight? Veronica refused to let that happen to her. By going public with her experience, she ensured that her grief and her healing wouldn't just be background noise to Micah's golden boy narrative. And there's something profoundly powerful about that, because miscarriage is still so heavily stigmatized. Too many women go through it in silence, feeling ashamed or broken, when in truth, it's a loss that deserves mourning and compassion. Veronica. Breaking that silence wasn't just about her relationship with Micah. It was about reclaiming her dignity in a world that often minimizes women's pain. The strength it takes to do that can't be overstated. Think about it. While Micah's image was being protected, Veronica chose to risk criticism and vulnerability to speak her truth. She could have stayed quiet. She could have disappeared into the background, letting the world keep believing the polished version of the story. But she didn't. She spoke up, and in doing so, she gave voice not only to her own pain, but also to countless others who've gone through similar heartbreak and never had the platform or the courage to say it aloud. What struck me most in her words was not just the grief, but the clarity. She didn't shy away from describing the pain, the betrayal, the deep sense of loss, but she also didn't let it define her. She framed it as part of her journey, part of what made her stronger. That's the balance that so many never find, the ability to acknowledge the hurt without letting it consume your entire identity. Veronica found that balance, and it shows a resilience that deserves recognition. And here's the thing. Her story hits harder precisely because it contrasts so sharply with the world of Welcome to Plathville. A world where glossy edits paint family drama into tidy arcs, where pain is often filtered through confessional interviews and controlled narratives. Veronica broke that filter. She showed what raw pain looks like outside the safety of camera crews and producers. It was unedited, unpolished, and in that, it was more real than anything the show ever broadcast. There's a universality in her story. 2. Even if you've never experienced miscarriage yourself, you can connect with the feeling of being silenced, of having your pain overlooked while someone else's story is glorified. That's why her words resonated so deeply with so many. They weren't just about Micah or about one relationship, they were about the cost of silence and the courage it takes to break it. For me, that's the emotional core of everything. The betrayal, the hypocrisy, the double life, all of it matters. But what gives the story its weight is Veronica's grief and her strength. She showed us that even in the face of heartbreak, even when silenced by those who should have spoken, you can still reclaim your voice. And honestly, that's the part I won't forget. Because long after Micah's modeling photos fade, long after the show edits new storylines, Veronica's courage in speaking her truth stands as a reminder. Silence may break you, but speaking out can heal. When we step back from the details of Veronica and Micah's relationship, something much larger comes into focus. This isn't just about two people and a painful breakup. It's about the way silence, control, and image management have always been at the center of the Plath family's story. And Veronica's experience, her betrayal, her grief, her courage in speaking out, fits into a broader pattern that we've seen play out over and over again on Welcome to Plathville. From the very beginning, the Plaths have projected a very specific image. A family rooted in traditional values. A family that stood against mainstream culture. A family that preached purity, control, and perfection. But behind that carefully constructed image, cracks have always been there. Ethan's anger, Mariah's rebellion, Kim and Barry's hypocrisy, time and again, what we've seen is that the reality doesn't match the narrative. Veronica's story just adds another layer to that contradiction. Because what happened to her isn't separate from the family's pattern, it's connected. Just like Ethan and Olivia's struggles were made harder by the family's refusal to acknowledge their pain, just like Mariah's rebellion was met with judgment instead of compassion, Veronica too was left in silence. She wasn't defended, she wasn't protected, and she wasn't acknowledged. Her grief and betrayal were invisible because they didn't fit the image the family wanted to maintain. And here's the double standard that becomes impossible to ignore. The Plaths have never been shy about commenting on other people's choices. We've seen Kim set impossible rules for Lydia's courtship, controlling every detail of what purity should look like. We've seen Barry criticize Ethan and Olivia's marriage, questioning their decisions, their values, even their right to live differently. We've seen Mariah judged for her clothes, her music, her independence. The family has always been vocal when it comes to pointing fingers at others. But when it came to Micah and Veronica, silence. Total silence. Even after Veronica spoke out publicly, even after she shared the pain of her miscarriage and the betrayal she endured, the family closed ranks. They protected Micah's image, and they let Veronica's pain hang in the air, unacknowledged. Why was her pain not worth speaking up about? Why was Micah's public persona more important than the truth? It's a hypocrisy that runs deep. On camera, the Plaths are quick to talk about values, about honesty, purity, family loyalty. But in practice, those values are conditional. They apply when they make the family look good. They apply when they reinforce the narrative the show is built on. But when honesty would expose dysfunction, when loyalty would mean standing with someone outside the circle, when purity doesn't match the chosen storyline, those values vanish. And isn't that exactly what we've seen with Ethan and Olivia? Over and over, their marriage has been picked apart, dissected, and judged by the family. Kim never hesitated to weigh in, to
criticize Olivia for not being submissive enough, for not fitting into the family mold. But did Kim ever take responsibility for the role she played in creating the tension? Did she ever admit how her control and manipulation contributed to Ethan's anger, to the breakdown of trust? No. Because that would require breaking the image. Or think about Mariah. Her choice to dress differently, to sing secular music, to date outside the family's approval, it was treated like rebellion, like she was the problem. But what was she really doing? She was simply carving out her own identity, pushing back against the control. And instead of supporting her, instead of acknowledging that maybe their rigid rules were suffocating, the family framed it as a moral failing. That's the same pattern we see with Veronica. The moment her story didn't align with the narrative, she was cast aside. Her pain didn't fit the family's values, because acknowledging it would mean confronting uncomfortable truths. It would mean admitting that Micah wasn't the golden boy the cameras showed. It would mean admitting that this family, for all its talk about purity and morality, is willing to stay silent when it benefits them, and that's what makes Veronica's courage so powerful. Because in breaking the silence, she shattered the illusion. She showed us what happens when the glossy image fades, when the unspoken truths come out. And once you see it, you start to realize, this isn't just Veronica's story. It's the story of Welcome to Plathville itself. A family that has built an empire on presenting one version of themselves while hiding another. It raises the question, how much of what we've seen on the show is real? How much of it is carefully managed to protect reputations, to maintain an image? And how many other Veronicas are out there, people who have been close to the Plaths, who have stories that Ver made it past the editing room, because let's be honest, reality TV thrives on drama, but it also thrives on control. Producers and families alike decide what gets shown and what gets hidden. In this case, Veronica's grief wasn't just hidden, it was erased. And that erasure says more about the Plath family than any of their words ever could. When I think about Ethan's simmering resentment, Olivia's constant feeling of being an outsider, Mariah's desperate need for freedom, it all ties back to the same core issue. This is a family that has always valued the image of control over the reality of connection. And in that sense, Veronica's story is not an outlier. It's part of a larger pattern that has defined the Plaths from the beginning, and maybe that's why her voice matters so much. Because in a world where silence is the rule, speaking out is revolutionary. By sharing her pain, Veronica exposed not just Micah, but the culture of silence that has allowed this family to hide dysfunction for so long. She pulled back the curtain, and in doing so, she revealed the bigger picture, a family that preaches values, but practices hypocrisy. A family that claims to protect purity, but sacrifices truth. A family that judges others, but refuses to confront its own flaws, and that's the story Welcome to Plathville has been telling all along, even if it never says it outright. The glossy image has always been just that, an image. The real story lies in the cracks. In the betrayals, in the silences, in the pain that gets left out of the edit. Veronica's story doesn't just fit into that narrative, it defines it, because at the end of the day, what we're left with isn't just the question of Micah's betrayal. It's the question of how many truths have been silenced, how many voices have been erased, in the name of maintaining the Plath family brand. And the answer, if we're honest, is more than we'll ever know. When we come to the end of Veronica's story, what lingers isn't just the betrayal, or the silence, or the pain of her miscarriage. What stays with us is her strength. The choice she made to speak out when she could have remained quiet. The courage it took to put her story into the world, knowing that people might doubt her, knowing that the Plath family might never acknowledge her truth. That, more than anything, is what makes this story unforgettable, because Veronica didn't just tell on Micah. She broke the silence that has hovered around this family for years. She forced us to see the side of Welcome to Plathville that never makes it into the carefully edited scenes. She reminded us that behind the glossy image, there are always real people, real consequences, real grief. And she refused to let her pain be swept under the rug just because it was inconvenient to the Plath brand. Her voice stands as truth against silence. And when you look at the bigger picture, that is radical. The Plaths have thrived on controlling the narrative, whether it's Kim and Barry enforcing rules that made their kids conform, or the family closing ranks to protect reputations, or even the way TLC edits the show to highlight certain dynamics while erasing others. The silence has always been the glue that held their image together. And Veronica broke that silence, which leads to the questions that we, as viewers, have to wrestle with. Do you think the family will ever acknowledge her story? Will Micah ever take accountability, even privately, for the pain he caused her? Or will silence once again win out, with the family choosing image over truth? And let's be honest, was this about protecting Micah, or was it about protecting the Plath family brand? Because if the Plaths truly cared about honesty, if they truly believed in the values they preach, wouldn't they have stood by Veronica? Wouldn't they have at least acknowledged her grief instead of pretending it never happened? Their silence speaks volumes. It tells us keeping Micah's image polished, and by extension, the family's reputation, was more important than doing what was right. But here's the thing about silence, it doesn't last forever. Truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes years. We've seen it with Ethan and Olivia, how their struggles forced the family's control issues into the open. We've seen it with Mariah, how her rebellion laid bare the suffocating rules she was raised under. And now we see it with Veronica, how her story exposes not just Micah, but the entire system of silence that has allowed dysfunction to thrive, and that's why I think this story matters so much. Because it's not just Veronica's story, it's a reflection of something bigger. It shows us what happens when image becomes more important than people. When protecting reputations takes precedence over protecting hearts. It shows us how damaging silence can be, not only to those inside the family, but to anyone who dares to get close. So let's not let her voice fade away. If you've been watching this unfold, if you felt the weight of Veronica's pain and the power of her courage, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Plaths will ever break their silence? Or will they continue to protect the brand at all costs? Do you believe Micah owes her a public acknowledgement, or do you think his silence is answer enough? This is where I want to open the floor to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your voice, just like Veronica's, deserves to be heard. And if this story resonated with you, if you want more deep dives into the truths behind reality TV, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. That way, you won't miss when we tackle the next story that others are too afraid to touch, and share this video with someone who's followed Welcome to Plathville. Because the more people who hear Veronica's story, the harder it becomes for it to be erased. This isn't just gossip. It's a reminder of how silence can destroy lives, and how speaking out can change the narrative. At the end of the day, Veronica's strength is what makes this story unforgettable. She took her deepest wound, something most people would have hidden, and she transformed it into a truth that can't be ignored. She refused to let Micah's betrayal define her, and instead, she defined the conversation. That is courage. That is power, and maybe that's the real takeaway here. Families like the Plaths will always try to protect their image. Reality shows will always try to control the edit. But individuals, people like Veronica, will always have the ability to disrupt that silence. To stand in their truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes others. To remind us that behind the glossy image, there is always something more real, more raw, and more human. So I'll leave you with this: silence protects the powerful, but truth empowers the broken. Veronica chose truth. And that's why her voice will echo long after the cameras stop rolling.